At exactly 9 o'clock in the morning on September 19th, inside an Estonian air surveillance facility designed to be boring, everything was boring. That was the point. Rows of operators watched green radar arcs sweep methodically across flat screens. Data refreshed at predictable intervals. Tracks appeared, moved, and disappeared exactly where they were expected to. Commercial flights climbed out over the Baltic. Cargo aircraft cruised westbound. Military traffic remained inside corridors agreed upon years earlier in conference rooms far away. No anomalies, no urgency, no reason for escalation. This was the kind of morning NATO planners hope never changes. Then 3 new tracks appeared. They didn't fade in gradually. They didn't drift into coverage. They were already fast, already high, already behaving like aircraft that had somewhere specific to be. Inside air defense rooms, nobody announces trouble out loud. There's no shouting, no dramatic gestures. Instead, posture changes. Keyboards go quiet, hands hover, eyes narrow just enough to confirm what instinct already knows. Routine traffic does not suddenly behave like interceptor aircraft by accident. The system tagged the contacts almost immediately. Russian MiG-31 aircraft, heavy interceptors. Long range, built to operate where most aircraft cannot. These were not patrol jets. These were machines designed to challenge airspace control. Their transponders were disabled. That single fact eliminated nearly every innocent explanation. No civilian aircraft flies dark in controlled airspace. No trained military crew does it by mistake. This was deliberate. The MiGs adjusted heading. Southbound, directly toward Estonian-controlled airspace. No storm cell forced the turn. No air traffic congestion required it. No emergency squawk justified it. Just 3 fighters crossing an invisible line that exists only because nations agree it matters. Inside NATO systems, that agreement was now being tested. What the Russian pilots could not see was the depth of the surveillance already watching them. This was not Estonia reacting alone. This was the alliance waking up. Estonian ground radar detected the initial tracks. Finnish systems confirmed altitude and speed. Naval radar refined heading and spacing. An airborne early warning aircraft added vertical separation and long-range context. Each sensor fed into the same digital architecture. Each update sharpened certainty. By the time the MiGs leveled off, their flight path was no longer just visible. It was modeled, predicted, projected forward in time. The formation advanced roughly 10 kilometers into Estonian airspace, holding altitude around 30,000 feet. That altitude mattered. It placed the aircraft squarely inside the optimal envelope of their onboard radar. A radar designed decades earlier to detect enormous strategic bombers. At that height, the Russian pilots believed they were surveying the situation from above. In reality, they were already inside a web. Below them, nearly 400,000 civilians were beginning their day. People driving to work, children heading to school, cafes opening their doors. None of them knew that 3 armed aircraft were quietly probing whether NATO's collective defense commitment was enforced by action or softened by hesitation. Instead of pressing deeper, the Russian formation slowed. Wide circular orbits replaced forward movement. Lingering. This was not indecision. It was provocation. Force attention. Force reaction, force NATO aircraft into visual range. Later, record it, edit it, turn it into proof of aggression. This tactic worked decades ago. It worked when radar saw everything and stealth did not exist. It worked when control of the sky depended on who showed up first. But NATO doctrine had moved on. 2 Italian F-35 fighters were already airborne as part of NATO's standing air policing mission. They did not rush. They did not climb aggressively, they simply repositioned. Inside the cockpit of an F-35, the sky is not empty. It is information. 6 infrared sensors embedded across the aircraft streamed continuous data into the pilot's helmet displays. Not dots, not symbols, actual shapes moving through space. The MiG's engines burned intensely against the cold upper atmosphere. From the Italian cockpit, the Russian aircraft were obvious. Bright thermal signatures suspended against a darker background. The Russians could not see the Italians, not because they weren't scanning, but because their sensors were optimized for the wrong era. The MiG-31's radar was built to find mass. Large reflections, big aircraft. It assumed that if something dangerous existed, it would announce itself by being large. The F-35 exploits that assumption. Electronically, it barely exists. As the Russian aircraft continued circling, NATO's integrated air defense system expanded outward. Quietly. Automatically, Finnish F-18 fighters advanced from the east. They did not attempt to hide. Their radar signatures were allowed to appear. To Russian sensors, they looked like the obvious response. That was intentional. Elsewhere, movement was invisible. Swedish fighters loitered over the Baltic Sea, radars off, silent. They received targeting updates through encrypted data links refreshing dozens of times per second. Speed, heading, altitude. Everyone saw the same picture at the same time. Inside Estonian command centers, nobody issued radio instructions. There was nothing to say. The system was already coordinating faster than speech ever could. The Italian fighters climbed gradually, remaining passive. Every sweep of Russian radar betrayed the MiG's exact position, angle, mode, orientation. The Russians were unknowingly describing themselves in detail. Inside the MiG cockpits, pilots checked behind them, again and again, because something felt wrong. At just after 9:12, the Italian lead pilot transmitted on the international emergency frequency. Calm, measured. Russian aircraft, you are inside NATO-controlled airspace. Turn east immediately. The reply came quickly. Routine flight, no violation acknowledged. This was not misunderstanding. It was defiance. Inside the Russian cockpits, warning systems began behaving unpredictably. Alerts chirped without direction. Something was there, but it could not be located. The Italian fighters slid directly above the MiGs, a blind zone. From that angle, Russian radar could not detect them without extreme maneuvering. Two stealth fighters tracking three interceptors who still did not know where the threat was. The Russian lead attempted a sudden dive. Drop low, hide and clutter. It failed immediately. The F-35 followed effortlessly. Its sensors filtered targets by velocity alone. Slow clutter was ignored. Fast aircraft were not. The MiGs pulled sharply upward. Afterburners ignited. They headed for thinner air where speed was supposed to save them. Instead, speed betrayed them. Their engines flared brightly against the cold stratosphere, visible to every infrared sensor watching. Inside the cockpits, confusion hardened into concern. Radar contacts multiplied, disappeared, reappeared. Nothing made sense. Italian electronic warfare systems fed false realities into Russian radar. Synthetic aircraft, convincing echoes, a sky that no longer obeyed logic. Then the Swedish fighters went active. Radars lit. The MiG warning systems escalated instantly. Multiple bearings, rapid closure. The trap was complete. Fuel consumption spiked, minutes disappeared. By now, Polish fighters were airborne. German aircraft followed. No requests were needed. The system reacted automatically. What began as a probe had become a multinational convergence. The Russian lead made one last aggressive gesture, turning toward Estonia's largest city. That crossed a threshold. Intercept geometry shifted instantly. Instead of blocking directly, NATO aircraft manipulated movement, pressure from one angle, then another. Each reaction pushed the MiGs farther from the city and deeper into NATO control. Fuel became the enemy. Every hard turn burned reserves they could not spare. Finally, the Russian lead transmitted again. Returning to base, NATO stayed with them. Swedish fighters moved into close escort, recording everything: weapons, signatures, configuration. Polish fighters assumed escort next. German aircraft held high cover. Finnish fighters sealed the exit. This was not assistance. It was supervision. By the time the MiGs approached home airspace, fuel was critically low. Speed dropped. Engines idled. NATO fighters slowed to stay with them. Russian escorts met them near the border. They arrived expecting success. They found humiliation. The Italian fighters turned west toward home. Fuel tanks healthy, radars barely used. The lesson was unmistakable. The Baltic is NATO airspace. And testing it does not lead to confrontation. It leads to control. Tap to watch for more.